Power in fiction isn't about who's the strongest. It's about who holds the emotional temperature. I'm Jack Lawrence, award-winning, best-selling mystery writer and former therapist. And on this channel, we talk about the psychology behind creating in-depth, believable, and realistic characters and plots that your readers just can't get enough of. Now, in psychology, especially systemic therapy, which is what I did, power is always relational. Every relationship has a power dynamic of some sort. The person with power generally sets the pace. You're going to follow along with whatever they say, whatever they do. You know, they're the ones who are leading the whole dance. They define what matters in the relationship, in the home, all of those things. If it's important to them, then it darn well better be important to you. Or vice versa, right? If it's important to you and somebody else doesn't share that sentiment, you get angry, you get frustrated, maybe you get defensive. You also decide what is ignored when you have the power, because it's not important to you. You're not going to pay it any mind. It doesn't need your time or your energy. Power can change with one line of dialogue. I've seen it a lot of times in therapy where one of the partners has all of the power. Maybe it's a family setting and one of the kids has all the power. One line is known to shake up the entire dynamic and the whole system, and that power shifts from one person to another. For instance, with narcissists, the narcissist has all of the power. They determine everything. They're setting the pace to the dance. They're choosing the song. The second that the person who is with the narcissist notices this pattern and they take control of their own life and determine what their outcome is going to be, it totally shifts the power dynamic, because now the narcissist doesn't have all the control. It's split. And in doing that, the narcissist essentially feels like they lose all of the control, and there's the appearance that now the other person has all of it. And a lot of times they do. So when do these power shifts happen? Going back to the analogy of a couple with a narcissistic partner, it happens when one person stops seeking approval. If you don't need this other person's approval, then now they lose all the power. They are no longer pulling at the strings because you're doing your own thing. If you withhold a reaction, a lot of times that's how people, manipulators, narcissists, people in power gauge based off of your reaction. The more volatile your reaction, the more power they have. When you deny that reaction, they don't have much to go off of. And a lot of times it's denying them what they're looking for. Because if you react volatile or in a volatile way, now they can say, see, this person is the problem, not me. If you name the unspoken, if you say the thing that's unwritten within this dynamic or this relationship, and you bring it to the surface, whatever that might be. Use your imagination in your story, but there's something that's being hidden, a dark truth, right? Something nobody really wants to talk about. They're always skirting around it. Once that comes to light, whoever brings it up is the person who's most likely going to take over power. So how do writers mostly get this wrong? Well, one, they equate power with aggression. That's not always the case. In fact, you can have a lot of power within a system and not be aggressive. Narcissists aren't generally aggressive. They can be, but a lot of times they have that calm demeanor, because if they're aggressive, it kind of paints, a little bit more even of a picture of who's hostile in the relationship versus who's not. Every narcissist I've worked with always tried to paint themselves as the helper, the one who's encouraging their partner to do things, but then they would turn around and do things that would sabotage it. leading to the idea that they might be a narcissist. So again, having power also doesn't mean that you're bad. Doesn't mean that you're in the wrong there. So especially if you're doing it and you're not in the wrong, then you're not going to be aggressive. Managers, bosses, parents, right? They are in power, but they don't have to always be aggressive in order to maintain or uphold that power. A lot of writers overuse threats. Most people, especially narcissists, aren't going to threaten. And people in power don't always threaten, right? I mean, it kind of depends on your book. Like, is this a king who's using threats to remain in control over their kingdom? Then maybe that makes sense. If it's somebody in the military, possibly. Law enforcement, sometimes. But again, those can be overdone. If you're constantly using a threat, it starts to wear thin, especially if there's no follow-through. So use the threats sparingly. Use them at times of the most tension, because then it's going to carry more weight. If every other chapter this person who's in power is throwing out a threat, by the third or fourth time the reader's checked out, your character should be checked out, because this person who's throwing all the threats obviously doesn't have as much power as they think they do, and they've worn thin whatever credibility that they had. Also, missing micro shifts is a big one, right? When a power dynamic shifts, it's very gradual. Right, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you're not going to instantly wake up and then that dynamic change a complete 180. What's going to happen is that you're going to start gaining more confidence. You're going to start gaining more voice. You're going to start gaining more sense of self, and your identity is going to start to shift. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is going to happen over the course of weeks to months to sometimes years, depending on the person. So utilizing those micro changes, right, where in the past, this situation would have caused this character to do X, and now they're doing Y. Or maybe they're doing C. They're doing something different that shows progression, shows that they have a little bit more confidence. It shows that they feel better about themselves. It shows that they're taking control over themselves. That is going to be the key. Showing those micro shifts, rather than all of a sudden you get to 3/4 of the way through the book and the dynamic just turns on its head. That rarely ever happens. And I've done a lot of therapy with couples and families. So how do you write a scene where there's a power shift? Well, you can end the scene where one character realizes they've lost leverage. Say the character that was in power says, does something that they've done in the past that would usually shut up the other character or get them to submit. Now they're not, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they stand up and that they're confronting this other person, but they're not afraid either. They're more resistant. It doesn't have to be a full-blown resistance, but they're not submitting. The other partner realizes that they needed it, right? Maybe that's the partner who was in the relationship with the narcissist. They realized that they needed the shift to have a sense of power, to have that confidence to stand up to their partner. Readers can feel a power shift long before they understand it. So if, say, the first third of your book, there's this very clear power structure. Second third, it starts to change a little bit. And then by the last third of the book, it's very obvious that there's been a power shift. Your reader's going to notice at the tail end of that first third, by the tail end of the second third, they're fully aware that a power shift is coming. Because they're going to see the dynamics, the little minute interactions being just a little bit different. And just different enough that the person who initially had all of the power is losing a lot of ground. If you found this video useful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, because every week I drop psychological tips and tricks to help bring life to your plot, your story, and your characters.